Welcome to BIB 406 Revelation Lecture 2. In today's lecture, we are going to focus on chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation. And in order to do that study, it's important for us to go back to chapter 1 and re-emphasize a verse, actually verse 19 of Revelation chapter 1, where we find a three-part outline for the entire book of Revelation. So let's jump back to Revelation 1:19 and look at this outline. Basically, we have three parts to this verse. We have the things which you have seen, talking about John, the things that he has seen, the things which are, and the things which will take place after this, or the things that will take place hereafter. And let's look at each one of these three parts and kind of dissect that a little bit. First of all, the things which you have seen. This is, again, talking about John and the beginning of the vision that he has that is recorded for us in this book. But it begins in chapter 1, verses 9 through 20. This would talk about the different aspects of the vision that John has seen and recording. The things which are would be the current conditions, especially with reference to the seven churches in Asia Minor that were contemporary or existing at the same time that John lived. So this is chapters 2 and 3, where we will be focusing in our lecture today, the things which are, just a description of or an assessment of the condition of those seven churches in Asia Minor. And then you have the things which will take place after this. This would be the future events that will occur, especially at the end of the age. And it's important to kind of understand where all of this fits within the scope of church history. So let's take a moment and look at that. The major time periods in the scriptures, you have creation and the flood, so that's all kind of one time period there in the Old Testament. You have from the flood up through Abraham, from Abraham to Joseph, Joseph through the nation of Israel, and then the nation of Israel through the birth of Christ, and then the birth of Christ up to his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. And after his ascension, you begin this apostolic period, and the beginning of the church age would fall somewhere within that apostolic period. And basically, we are still within that time period of the church age today. But all of these past events, so going back to 1 through 6, all of those had to take place before this church age could commence. So now we are in the church age. There is now nothing else that is standing between us and the second return of Christ. So basically, if you were living in the nation of Israel and somehow you were aware of a second coming, well, you couldn't have a second coming without first going through the first coming of Christ. So if you were back here in these stages, you would know that if I'm looking for the last piece of this puzzle, then I'm not going to be able to see that until some of these other pieces come together. Well, we are living in a unique time period now where all of these things have passed, and there is nothing now standing between us and the second return. There are no other events that need to take place. The next thing on God's timetable will be the second coming of Christ. All right, so the next event to take place will be that second coming. And this is why Revelation is so important, because we are looking forward with anticipation to that second coming. And the descriptions and details given to us in Revelation will help us to make sense of what will take place when that happens, and also the events that lead up to that second coming. All right, before we get into the outline of chapter 2, I want to take a moment and talk about a couple of ways that people, scholars, pastors will often interpret the letters to the seven churches found in chapters 2 and 3. One option is to interpret these seven churches as representing distinct time periods within church history. So, for example, the first letter would cover from the early apostolic period through maybe a 50 or 100-year time frame, and then the second letter would cover the next period of time, third letter, the next period of time, etc., until you get all the way down to the seventh letter, which is the last letter, and that would be descriptive of the state of the church right before the end of the end, right before the second coming occurs. And the argument would be made that that is the time in which we live, that we are living in this last of the last times, and therefore the letter written to the church of Laodicea would be descriptive of our present state, of our church today, that it's lukewarm, that it's lost its first love, that it's neither cold nor hot. And you probably have heard sermons, preached about that. And I would advocate for a more accurate interpretation, being that these 7 letters are actually characteristic of the church at any point in time during the church age. That you could take different pieces of these letters and say that they are true about the church at all times. So, because there are some churches today that are on fire for God in different parts of the world, and there are some places that it's more apathetic. So I would say that these are just pictures of what the church it looks like, characteristics of the church, and they could be true about the church at any given point in time within the church age, rather than kind of a more distinct sequential, okay, these are the characteristics of it at this time, these are the characteristics of it at this time. Rather than dividing it out like that, I would say that it just gives you a picture as a whole of what the church looks like and could look like at any point during the church age. All right, so the outline of chapter 2, you have the exhortations to the 7 churches. You have Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum,